Hello everyone, it's Shannon here, and in today's video I'm going to show you how to create this fun trifold card using some brand new products from Waffle Flower's May release. Here are the products I'm using today. First up is the brand new Salty Kisses combo set. This combo comes with the Salty Kisses stamp set as well as the Salty Kisses matching die. You can order them separately, but you do save $2 when you order them together in the combo. I'm also going to use the A2 nested domes die as well. To start, I have an A2 panel of 110 pounds cardstock. This is ink blended already because this is actually just a scrap. I'm going to use this panel to create a jig, and I will use this jig to help me position my window in the same spot in all of my openings on my card. I have a die from the Salty Kisses matching die set on top of this arch just to help me decide where I need to stop the cut, because I am going to do a partial die cut here. So you can see I have my top plate not completely covering that arch window die, and so I'm not going to cut that lower portion of the die. And so right now I'll just kind of have a flap, you see? And now I will trim the rest off using an X-Acto knife and a ruler. The reason why I didn't just go ahead and cut the whole arch is because I wanted it a little bit smaller so it would fit right behind the archway image that comes with the Salty Kisses stamp set. Now that I've trimmed that bottom off, I'm just placing the die for the archway right over just to double check, and yeah, it's a nice size and it fits perfectly behind that arch die cut. Now I have an A2 panel of light blue cardstock and I have my jig right on top. I'm going to line in my arch die right inside the jig, just nestle it right up against the jig, use some purple tape to hold it in place, and then I will take my top plate and line it up right just a little bit higher than the bottom opening of my jig. And again, this will ensure that this opening is exactly centered and the same on all of my panels, because I actually am going to cut this opening 4 times. So the jig makes this really easy. Now I've got the jig back on top, trace the bottom real quick, and now I'm going to use my ruler and X-Acto knife to cut the bottom and completely release that inside arch. And this will actually, this blue panel will be the very front panel of my trifold card. Now I'm going to move on to my card bases. So I have 2 A2 side folding card bases, and I'm going to start with this first one. This will be the front of my card, and I am going to place my jig on top because I'm going to cut a window again. But this is going to be a little different because we have to do a partial die cut like we've done before, but we have this large piece of paper and we can't line it up. We can't line the plate up like we did before. So I'm going to line my jig up right with the edge of the cardstock and then nest my die right inside the jig. And now here's where it's a little different. I'm going to pick up my card base here and fold the bottom or the back side of the card underneath the bottom plate, and now I'll take my top plate and again line it up like we did before, just a little bit above the bottom of the jig opening. And you can see how it's sandwiched there, and now I'll run it through my die cutting machine. I'll remove the purple tape here and you'll see it cut just like before, where it cut like a flap, and I'll have to trim the bottom to release the archway, but I didn't cut the back side of my card base, which is important. That's the whole reason why we tucked that back side under the plate so the die wouldn't cut it. Now I put the jig right back on top, trace that bottom line, and now I'm going to cut the very bottom of the archway, and then that negative will come completely out. And again, the jig makes sure that this archway matches the blue one that I cut earlier. So when I put that blue panel on top, it'll be the same. Now with this trifold card, you actually have to flip your second card base so the fold is now on the right instead of the left. And you can see how I have it lined up here. Right there is where I'm going to cut my next archway. But before I cut it, I actually want to trim the left side. I'll point out here in just a second, because when you put these two together, the thickness of the paper causes the right side to stick out a little bit. So I actually trimmed the left side, the unfolded side right there, just 1/16, just a small amount. So now when I fold the card completely closed, there is no, that second card base isn't sticking out from the top card base. You don't have to do this. This is just me just wanting it to be seamless. So I'm going to die cut this just like I did before, except flipped. But I'm going to line up this jig along the fold. That's really important because it is 1/16 inch smaller. So we want to line the jig up with the fold this time. So the fold that's on the right. And now that I've got the jig in place, I got my die inside the jig and I'm using my purple tape to hold it. And just like before, I have the back side of the card base tucked under so I don't die cut all the way through both layers of cardstock. And again, this is also a partial die cut, just like all the ones before. So I stopped the top plate just before I got to the bottom of the jig. So very similar. The only difference here to the previous card base is that we did cut this down 1/16 of an inch, so we just have to make sure you line the jig up to the fold and not to the cut side. Now I'm going to place that jig on top, trace the bottom edge, and then cut it out with my, well, I traced it, but I didn't cut it out yet. I almost made a mistake here actually, because before I cut it out, I want to partially die cut this dog die, or these dog dies from the Salty Kisses stamp set. I want this to be part of this opening. So I actually have the dogs, the bottom of the dogs just slightly below that traced line, and then I'm going to partially die cut those as well. So I didn't have the top plate completely covering those dogs. And you'll see here how most of the dogs are completely cut out except for the very bottoms of them, and they're still attached to that archway. And now I'm going to cut out the remaining portions. So there's just two little portions where the dogs meet the archway on both sides of the left and right side of the dogs. I'm just going to trim that off with my X-Acto knife. So now the dogs are all one piece, part of that opening. Just putting it together just to make sure everything's lined up and it looks good thanks to the jig. Now I have one last A2 panel to cut. This is just light blue cardstock. I am trimming that right side, or I'm sorry, that left side again like I did before with my second card base. I just trimmed it down 1/16 of an inch so it fits that second flap on the inside. And then I'm taking my jig, lining it up with the right side of that panel. And once I get it nice and lined up with the edge of the right side of the panel, I will pop in my die cut, or my die, and then I'll hold everything down with the purple tape. And again, this is also going to be a partial die cut, so I'm going to stop my top plate right at the very bottom, just before the very bottom of that opening, and run it through my die cutting machine. Remove the purple tape here, and then I will have that flap, and then I will just trace it with the jig one more time, and then I will cut it with my X-Acto knife. You could save some time here if you chose to use blue cardstock, heavyweight cardstock to make your card base. The only problem is you'd have to cut a white panel for the inside of your card for the stamped images on the inside of the card, but that would save you having to cut this arch opening 4 times. But I didn't have any good heavyweight light blue cardstock that I liked, and I like to make my cards out of 110-pound cardstock, so that's why I went through the trouble of cutting panels out of the blue just to cover up. I didn't want it to be white, I wanted it to be blue. You could also ink blend too if you don't want to cut. So now I'm taking some tape runner here and just putting some tape on the back side of these A2 blue panels and lining them up. This is the slightly smaller one, so I did cut off 1/16 off of both the card base and this light blue A panel, so these line up perfectly with each other. And now I'm moving on to my front card base, and I'm going to again use some tape runner to put this down. Normally, if you watch my videos, you know that I'm typically a liquid glue girl, but for this, because of the cardstock is very thin weight, that light blue cardstock is thin weight, the tape runner works a lot better for adhering that on. So now I'm going to stamp the inside of my card. So I have my second card base here, the one that I trimmed down 1/16 of an inch. And I am now going to pull off some images from the Salty Kisses stamp set. I'm pulling off that main kind of beach scene, really beautiful and so great for making a really quick scene or setting. Really makes it easy. I have my used my jig again on top of there just to kind of line it up and make sure I have the right proportions of ocean and sand being visible through the window. And now I'm pulling off some sentiments. I'm going to use congratulations and Mr. and Mrs., which I think is really sweet that you have this Mr. and Mrs. sentiment with those sweet coupled puppies. This is a really fun set, great for weddings, great for anniversaries even. You can even use it for engagement parties or bridal showers. I just inked up the images with Memento Tuxedo Black, and I'm stamping them twice just to make sure they're nice and bold and crisp. And the reason why I'm using Memento Tuxedo Black, I'm sorry if I said white before, is because I'm going to do some Copic coloring, and this is an alcohol marker friendly ink. So now I'm moving on to doing some Copic coloring. I've already stamped on some scrap cardstock here some images from the Salty Kisses stamp set. I'm stamping the dogs, and I stamped the dogs and the archway, and now I'm going to Copic color these. I'll also color that scene that I just stamped for you guys, but I'm going to do these first. My colors are on screen so you can follow along as I do this, and I'm going to play a little bit of music, and I'll meet you back when I'm just about finished coloring this. So I'm just about done here. I'm just adding a little bit more blue to the waves just to darken it a little bit and add a little bit more contrast. And now I'm finished Copic coloring. I'll grab my other images that I colored, and I'm going to die cut those dogs and that archway out. So I've already gone ahead and used the matching dies to die cut those out, and now I'm ready to assemble my card. I'm going to use some liquid adhesive here and add it to the back side of my second card base and glue it right inside the first card base there. Now I'm going to, once I get it all lined up, I'll grab that liquid adhesive again and glue those doggies right to the partial die cut that we did earlier in the archway. And they fit nice and perfectly on there. And then the last thing I'm going to do is glue the archway, the image archway, right over my die cut archway. Just use a little bit of liquid adhesive here because it doesn't touch everywhere, so I have to be kind of strategic where I put the dabs of glue. and I just used it on the corners, really behind the grass, and just stuck it right down. And that completes the card. So you have a really pretty front where you can see the archway and the dogs, and you get a hint of the beach scene behind there. And I just love how once you open that front flap, you see more of the scene. It's such a fun reveal. And then when you open the second flap, you see the inside of the card with this big beach scene with your sentiment. So it's a really fun card, a great surprise, and this set works so perfect for so many different kind of wedding themed occasions. I hope you guys enjoyed my card today. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and thank you so much for watching.